today I would like you to do some work with your imagination to conjure up the atmosphere of the first and second seasons of the Ballets Russes in Paris. And it's quite difficult to do that because the ballet being a very ephemeral genre, it's not preserved in exactly the same form, so we can't see exactly the same thing that the Parisians saw in 1909 and 1910. So we'll try to piece it all together from pictures, from memoirs, from some of reconstructed choreographies, which will never be quite the same as it was at the time. But so we'll have to reconstruct it in our minds. Starting with this wonderful print by Leon Bakst, which I think gives you a sense of what we're going to talk about today. The draw of the exotic, the draw of the oriental, this twisted body, the amazing colors. But we'll start with the question, why ballet? Because if you were to my lecture last time, you probably remember that I left Diaghilev at the moment of his great operatic success in Paris, which was the production of Boris Godunov by Mussorgsky, with the great bass Fyodor Shaliapin in the main role. So why suddenly ballet? We know that Diaghilev wasn't actually that interested in ballet himself, and he actually wanted to bring 4 operas in the next season. Many people try to claim that they were the ones who persuaded Diaghilev to do that. Yeah, so there are different versions of events. But basically, there was this great asset in Russia, the Imperial Ballet in St. Petersburg. And at that point, the ballet was changing, it was reforming, it was becoming more exciting. It had stars like Anna Pavlova, whom you know as Pavlova, yeah, and you know her as a dessert, but actually her name was Pavlova. As you can see, she was in her late 20s by that stage, so she was already a great star. And the very young and new star, Vaslav Nijinsky, who started dancing when he was 17 in St. Petersburg. And he was one of these very first male dancers who suddenly became stars, because before that emphasis was always on the female star, on the prima ballerina. And probably the most important of them all, of those assets of the imperial theaters, was Mikhail Fokine, or Michel Fokine, yeah, in the Paris pronunciation, who was the choreographer. He was also a dancer with the Ballets Russes himself, but it's about his role as a choreographer that we're going to talk now. So what did he do? Yeah, so he already staged some ballets at the Mariinsky Theatre. And the novelties that he introduced were extremely important. So he was trying to take the ballerinas out of their pointe shoes, yeah, their point shoes, take them off the point. And it was quite difficult to do because they were not allowed to use barefoot dancing, which was becoming the fashion. So very famously, in one of the first ballets that he staged, he painted bare feet on the shoes. So he relaxed the technique. You probably know that the classical ballet posture is very rigid. Yeah, you have turned out feet, and only a few positions for the arms not doing very much. Yeah. So he introduced a range of less stylized movements, yeah, borrowing from various folk dances, also from Greek and Egyptian art, from wrestling, from everything. You have to remember that these people were incredibly well educated and very curious. So they would go to museums, they would look at art, they would look at various objects, they would look at various historically appropriate types of gesture and introduce them into dance. He was influenced by Isadora Duncan, yeah, who had toured Russia in 1905, and she of course danced with bare feet and in this flowing dress, very simple tunic. And she also introduced this fashion of dancing to already existing classical hits, which he is also going to support. He puts emphasis on the upper body. Yeah, the arms start moving and expressing feelings, emotions, and also sort of national, various national gestures, yeah, that you can associate with the East, for example, or with Spain, or with Hungary, or something like that. And what he was also very good of was choreographing these mass dances. Yeah, so he got rid of the static corps de ballet when they were all doing the same things, and got them to move in what seemed almost haphazard manner, but it was all polyphonically choreographed. Yeah, there were groups of people doing different things, which was absolutely overwhelming to start with. Yeah, when you see it the first time. And the main thing that for every new ballet, he would devise a new choreographic idiom. Yeah, so it would not be like the previous one. And even for different characters, they will be dancing in a different style, which was a completely new thing. Now, Diaghilev did not allow to film the productions, although you can imagine that the technology was already there to make the films, but he thought it didn't actually reflect what was happening on stage. It was a very poor reflection. So we don't have hardly anything on film. But I wanted to show you just little things, again, to fire up your imagination. So this is one of the ballerinas, Tamara Karsavina, who became one of the stars. And you will see her in the Fokine choreographed dance, which is called Dance with the Torch. So the first thing that you notice, yeah, that she is not as underfed, yeah, as as contemporary ballerinas, and that was indeed, you know, the style at the time. And the second thing that you notice, that although she uses point, yeah, at various points, it doesn't look like a classical piece anymore. Yeah, her hands are much freer, her arms are much freer, and she's doing something. She's becoming the torch herself. Yeah. So another one, a tiny bit of Nijinsky. You can't actually see anything. It's just a glimpse. Just some shiny clothes, nothing else. Tiny, tiny clip, just a fantasy. And another one is Anna Pavlova in a piece which is called Californian Poppy. So she's dancing as a poppy, as a flower. So she was a new type of ballerina, this very fragile body. Everyone was commenting on that, yeah. And you can see, again, there are elements of classical movement still present, but she is much more expressive than that. So these were all the things that were already existent in Russia, and this is why it was possible to bring them to Paris. But what happened with this first ballet season? As I said, originally Diaghilev wanted to bring 4 operas. Yeah, so he wanted to capitalize on the success of Boris Godunov. He wanted to bring Rimsky-Korsakov's The Maid of Pskov, which was remained Ivan the Terrible. You can see what he's doing. Yeah, you had Boris Godunov, now you'll have Ivan the Terrible. Shalappin again is in the main role. Yeah, so capitalizing on his success. Glinka's Ruslan and Ludmila, which was one of his favorite operas, and he'd already done Act 1. He wanted to do it again. Borodin's Prince Igor, and Serov's Judith, which is less known, but he also had Chatelet there, so he was pretty confident of its success. And only one evening of ballet, yeah, that was the original plan. And it had three one-actors in it. Yeah, so Le Pavillon d'Armide, which was a ballet based on Versailles, we might talk about it in one of the other lectures. Les Sylphides, which was based on Chopin's music and didn't have any plot, and Cleopatra, which was the Oriental ballet. So that was the original plan. What happened in the end, it had to be all completely different, because the main funder of the season, the Russian Grand Duke Vladimir, died. And nobody else from the Russian court was prepared to fund this enterprise, because everyone hated Diaghilev already by that stage. Yeah, so, and suddenly he had to rethink the whole thing. He only left one single act, so 2 acts from Judith, yeah, to cut down on the opera. And they had to make up the rest with another evening of ballet. So this is how ballet gets in, almost by accident, almost as a result of a misfortune. And this is what you have, yeah, so in one evening you have Le Pavillon d'Armide, then one act of Prince Igor, which is actually the Polovtsian Dances. So it's opera which is actually ballet. Yeah, and you have this thing, Le Festin, which is, he used it many times, this title, for various things. It's basically a divertissement of different pieces, yeah, just single numbers stuck together. He still went on with Ivan the Terrible, and strangely, it didn't have quite the same effect as Boris Godunov. Yeah, they didn't find the music was quite so exciting. It was Rimsky-Korsakov's opera, and Rimsky-Korsakov wasn't there because he died the previous year. So, and then, yeah, as you can see, they put together in the same way things that were already there, rearranged them, yeah, opera together with the ballet. It all happened in Théâtre de Chatelet, which was quite big. It was sitting more than 2,000 people, but it was quite shabby, yeah, not particularly prestigious, which tells you that he wasn't top dog yet, yeah. So what did he do? This is amazing. I told you last time that he liked to interfere with every single detail, yeah, really sort of manage every single detail. So he decided to refurbish the theater. Yeah, so remove 9 rows to put a bigger orchestra in and to create more space, to put some more velvet, you know, new velvet, something fresher in the auditorium. Amazingly, designed the seating plan, which would be aesthetically pleasing. Actually, at the first row of the dress circle, he invited actresses and ballerinas who were incredibly pretty, and just removed the men altogether. They were just sitting there. Blonde, brunette, blonde, brunette, blonde, brunette. I mean, who would think of that? Yeah, that reminds you that in those days you didn't just look on the stage. Yeah, the theater was also looking at the audience. So they were called the basket of flowers. Everyone was commenting on this. So colorful souvenir program books were designed, which people could take away. You can still buy them sometimes on eBay, yeah, so they still have their value. And of course, for every one of these Mariinsky ballets that were already there, existing ones, he actually refurbished them as well. For example, with Cleopatra, he decided that the music of Arensky was no good, not bright enough, not interesting enough. So he scrapped the music and used the same choreography for different pieces, for pieces that were more familiar, by music by Glinka, by Mussorgsky, better music. Yeah, it's a little bit like a film director who would just choose to use already existing hits rather than hiring a new composer. Yeah, so he did the same thing. And the new sets had to be painted because actually the Mariinsky would not release the sets. There was, so, as I said, so much against this whole enterprise that they would not give them for free. Now, all of that had to happen with the help of the French side, and I have to mention, to be fair, this person, Gabriel Astruc, who was a theater manager and a critic and an impresario, and who basically ended up finding funders on the French side for Diaghilev, and ended up in debt, as a result of this season, but also became famous. And he was very important in bringing other people to Paris, such as Toscanini, for example, and Puccini in the Italian season. So he was a very brave man who had to weather quite a lot of difficulties in that season. So the result was astonishing, though, and here is just one of these ecstatic appraisals of ballet. And this is in the city where people actually wondered whether anybody would actually attend a whole evening of ballet. It wasn't fashionable at that point at all. And yet, this is what you have. This is Count Harry Kessler, who was a German diplomat. I could never have dreamt of a mimetic art that was so beautiful, so refined, so far beyond any theatrics. Strange but true, since seeing Tristan and Isolde, Wagner's opera, for the first time, I don't think I've ever been so deeply impressed by a theatrical production. These women, Pavlova, Karsavina, Rubinstein, and these men, or rather boys, Nijinsky and a few hours, seem to have descended from another higher, more beautiful world, just like living gods and goddesses. We are truly witnessing the birth of a new art. To achieve such effects is a measure of our modern refinement. It testifies to an aesthetic appreciation that verges on the perverse. So this is a statement that comes from the age where decadence was a positive thing. Decadence, excess, this incredible stimulation of all the senses at once was how people imagined the luxury living. And this is what Ballets Russes offered them. But not everyone was so enchanted, and you have this rather sarcastic phrase from Claude Debussy. As to the ballet, it's probably that I have completely forgotten the meaning of this sort of spectacle, since I was bored by it. All the same, what a peculiar way to dress people. It seems to me that we have better than that at the Folies Bergère, which is the cabaret, music hall in Paris. So, and you would think, he doesn't understand ballet, he doesn't like ballet, he doesn't know ballet. What is he doing? The next day, Diaghilev approaches him to write a ballet, and he says, yes, I'll think about it. So he starts actually working on one of the projects. So even people who were not quite convinced could not resist the lure of this spectacle. And the lure of the Orient, which is our next chapter. Now, if we look at what was performed, so the one in color are the Oriental ones, or the exotic ones. Not all of them were quite about the East, but you can see that sort of roughly half and half. So why is it that the Oriental theme became so popular? And of course, France and Russia were both colonies, with these outlying regions. So there was always an interest in this difference that these lands could bring to the metropolis. So you probably remember that Paris has all these Egyptian obelisks, connected to Napoleon's campaigns. The painter Delacroix visited North Africa and Morocco. There were I should probably, first of all, show you this. So, and you would think, what would they, why were they so enchanted and shocked by all these costumes if they had already art like this, in the middle of the 19th century? So, France was interested in the Orient. It has its own tradition. There were composers such as Félicien David, who wrote a piece about Arabia in 1842, or Saint-Saëns, who was interested in North African music. And of course, in Russia, Oriental fashions followed the order of imperial conquests. Yeah, so when they were conquering the Caucasus, you had music taking motifs from there, then they shifted to Central Asia, and you have Borodin writing music based on Central Asian motifs and so on. So you're kind of progressing as the empire is extending to the east. And of course, in Paris, there were also Paris expositions, which regularly brought the taste of the East to the public. And you can see this as this Sudanese house. And musical influences as well. Very famously in 1889, there was a Javanese gamelan, which is an orchestra of these very amazingly sounding bells and other instruments, which Debussy heard, and which also influenced his music. So this is what you have in terms of musical Orientalism. In Russia, one of the heights of it was Borodin's opera Prince Igor, which portrayed, pitted against each other, the Russians and the Orientals, which were called Polovtsians. Nobody knew by that stage, by the 19th century, who the Polovtsians actually were supposed to be. But so they were these kind of stereotyped Orientals. So basically, with the Orient, as you probably know, geographical precision is not important. So it doesn't matter whether it's Far East, Middle East. It's all becomes a bit blurred in the imagination, and the very colorful stereotypes arising from all that mixture. One is of that wild masculinity, and all these warriors. Barbaric force of those warriors, and another one is feminine sensuality and eroticism and the taste of the harem, and the forbidden. So the masculinity, one of these wonderful moments we can see in the Polovtsian Dances, and this is Fokine's choreography, but used in a film. So you can see, the movement of masses. That's just what I described, about Fokine. I'll go back a little bit because I missed out something about Le Festin. Just to show you that this Le Festin, feast, was also a collection of numbers, mostly based on Oriental nations. For example, the Lizginka from Glinka's Ruslan and Ludmila, which is based on Georgians, so the Caucasus, which I mentioned. And you can see the colorful costumes from the pictures of the time. But some of them weren't quite Oriental, but also were exotic. And this, for example, there were the Hungarians at the very end of that evening, which apparently had a great effect as well. That's Glazunov's music from Raimonda, which... finally, Cleopatra, which proved to be the greatest hit of all. So as I said, music of Orensky he replaced by other kind of music, and he got Leon Bakst to design this amazing set, which was had this incredible inside of an Egyptian temple, as you can see, in very unusual colors, which was very impressive. And the Cleopatra herself was Ida Rubinstein, who was a different kind of dancer. She was not as well trained as those people from the Mariinsky, but she had this amazing physique and sort of Oriental features, as she would describe. She was Jewish. And she also, she could strip quite well. Yeah, she was already stripped in as Salome the previous year. Yeah, actually stripped off completely, in Russia. So they did something a little bit like that in Paris. Not quite completely. She was left in something very transparent. But there was this idea of taking the veils off. Yeah, so it was this kind of glorified striptease presented with Orientalist music. I can show you a little bit of how this all worked together. Only, again, you have to disregard the music because this is a version with Arensky music. Yeah, so we couldn't quite have everything. But you can sort of, this is the Bakst design and Fokine's choreography. Typical music as well, even though if they replaced it with something similar. Yeah, but you will usually have an oboe. An oboe is a very Oriental instrument because it has this double reed, yeah, which reminds people of zurna, or the zurna, yeah, the Oriental reed instrument. So you would usually have something like that, and a little bit of percussion, yeah, a little bit of dance feel to it. And it would all be, the lines, the melodic lines would be all snaking, sinuous, yeah, chromatic. So as if the music already suggests the movement, yeah, of the arms and so on. So Cleopatra was a great success, and of course Diaghilev wanted to capitalize on it in the next season. So what happens in the next season? They move to the Grand Opera House. Yeah, so that's definitely moving up in the world. And yet, ironically, no more operas. Yeah, this is the moment when Diaghilev Company becomes the ballet company exclusively, almost exclusively. And that was again the financial reasons, yeah, because it was much cheaper to present the ballet, and after a while Diaghilev stopped bringing the orchestra in. Yeah, you could sacrifice the orchestra. With opera it wasn't possible because they would need to rehearse together. Yeah, with the ballet you didn't necessarily have to bring the Russian orchestra, you could use French musicians. That cut a lot of expense. But he also makes these new steps, yeah, so he now commissions new works. Yeah, he doesn't recycle the works from the Mariinsky, but he commissions new works. And he has 3 Oriental ballets versus 2 non-Oriental. So you can see which way we're going. So Scheherazade, Les Orientales, which is another divertissement, and the Firebird. Just to, showing you a little bit from Les Orientales, about which we don't know very much. This is Nijinsky, yeah, in one of his stylized Oriental poses. But one of the main winning pieces was Scheherazade, and we're going to talk about it at length. Again, this was the same idea. So the kind of recycling the idea of Cleopatra, but now with better music. And the music that Diaghilev chose was an existing symphonic suite by Rimsky-Korsakov, which had its own program that did not have an orgy and a massacre at the end. So he thought he would add that, yeah? So he completely created this incredible spectacle, completely disregarding what Rimsky-Korsakov wanted. And thankfully Rimsky-Korsakov wasn't there to see it, but his widow was very upset about it. And complained. There was, of course, when this all reached Russia, the news of that, blasphemy, yeah, again, Diaghilev's reputation fell even lower. Yeah, what are you doing there in Paris? How are you representing our greatest composer? So the artist Valentin Serov wrote a letter for the press in defense of Diaghilev. And this is what he said. It was, of course, a blasphemy to produce Scheherazade against the grain of the program that Rimsky-Korsakov provided for his symphonic suite. But once this blasphemy has actually been seen on the stage, the crime is mitigated. There is so much true beauty in these dances, in the clothes, in the background, and in the beings who move to Rimsky-Korsakov's captivating music, so that we forget how different it all is from Rimsky-Korsakov's program, while we still recognize that same Orient and accept it as another fairy tale from 1001 Nights. Yeah, so yes, it is blasphemy, but you had to have seen it. It was amazing. So Rimsky-Korsakov, choreography by Fokine, and the design again by Bakst. Well, this is a reconstruction, and so I wanted to show you both this very sensuous pas de deux. What happens there is, that the favorite slave Zobeide is left alone by Shahryar, her husband, and while he is away, she falls for the golden slave, and they dance this erotic dance. And another bit that I want to show you is the orgy. Yeah, you had to have an orgy. And Fokine was extremely good at choreographing them. Yeah, so this is... And then the husband comes back. Again, in Rimsky-Korsakov's music, it's just a storm on the sea, and the ship goes down during the storm. But here you can see it's much more exciting than that. I think one of the main heroes of Scheherazade was Bakst and his design. This is one of the versions of this which he had himself done, and it's all in green. But I think what they actually saw was this one, which is a combination of indigo and emerald green. And everyone writes about this. This was something that absolutely astonished them. And I've chosen this quote from a Vogue writer in 1915 who actually puts Bakst at the center of this whole experience. Yeah? A visual artist becomes the center of a ballet spectacle. Isn't that interesting? Like an exuberant barbarian, Bakst wanted his pigments to live with the music and the dancers, to sing and shout and dance with joyous abandon. Emerald, indigo and geranium, the leopard spots and the scales of the serpent, black, rose, vermilion and triumphant orange were all shrieking to be heard and shrieking in strange harmony. The colors were shrieking, yeah? It's a kind of synesthesia. And of course, to this color was added music, the flying colors of the dancers, that's all secondary, and the art of Nijinsky and of Tamar Karsavina. The effect of Bakst's scenery was halted by the voluptuous movement of the dancers and the astonishing music of Rimsky-Korsakov. The result was a bacchanal more splendid than Rubens ever dreamed of, an orgy of sound, color, and movement. So look at this again. There were various interesting influences that this particular curtain, the green curtain with the blue in it, had. If you look at Matisse, who was there together with Proust, together with lots of other artists and writers, he got particularly hooked on that combination of blue and green. And you can see it in his own Moroccan paintings of a few years later. Yeah, so he goes to the actual Orient and sees it in the colors of Bakst. And here in particular, yeah, his very famous piece which comes from 1910, yeah, so exactly from the right year. And actually Bakst was so fashionable at that point, and everyone wanted him, that he actually was able to move in, share studio with Matisse. Yeah, so it's not a complete coincidence. But also this brooch by Cartier, yeah, which puts in this very iconic Art Deco way sapphires with emeralds. Apparently, sapphires and emeralds were put together also under the influence of Bakst's green and blue. It's wonderful. So, and the fashion was influenced by the Russians as well. So there was this fashion designer, Paul Poiret, and he basically just produced harem pants and turbans for the seasons of 1911, 1912. There was a very special party which was called the 1,002nd Night. And this, you can see his wife, Madame Poiret, dressed in this very balletic costume, the so-called lampshade tunic that they all wore in Scheherazade, and harem pants and a turban. Yeah, so I just love the idea that Russians could influence Paris fashions. It doesn't happen very often. And Bakst became so much part of the popular culture. I wanted to give you this little snatch of a Cole Porter song from 1919, yeah, which is about the singer's, the protagonist's mother, who is very progressive and incredibly wants to have everything in the last fashion.
To show to what limits our nerves have been taxed, why she just had the bathroom done over by Bakst, and for instance...
Yeah, so Bakst becomes a rhyme to taxed. Our nerves have been taxed. Yeah, so you can see he becomes sort of a hero of popular culture. And that's all starts with Scheherazade. I wanted to show you another instance of influence of Scheherazade. And this is the influence on Maurice Ravel. You know, Diaghilev was thinking ahead. He didn't want just to think of this as a particularly Russian enterprise. One of the first things that he did, he commissioned Maurice Ravel a ballet. But Ravel took his time. And so it wouldn't be until 1912 that was produced, and that would be a Greek ballet, Daphnis and Chloé. Now, also designed by Bakst. And you can see from this design that it's not supposed to be an Oriental ballet. Yeah, Greek is not Oriental. Ancient Greek is something that is, the root of Western civilization. So it's not the exotic other, it's us. Yeah, and there's very different associations, especially in France, with classical Greece, which have to do with a lot with purity and innocence. You know, when they were all imagining still that the statues were white, yeah, and not painted, and it's a completely different idea. There was nothing like this, barbarian sensuousness and eroticism and anything like that. And you can see that, encapsulated in the contrast of these two bodies. So Ravel is writing a Greek ballet, but he cannot get away from the lure of the Oriental. Yeah, and bit by bit, various bits of the Oriental start getting into the ballet. He's particularly worried about the ending. Actually, the whole thing was delayed by a year because he couldn't write the final dance. He didn't know what to do. And eventually, he said, I just put Scheherazade on my, on my music stand and sort of lived through it. And that helped him to write the finale. So, if you remember Polovtsian Dances, I'll play it again. They have this raucous choir. Yeah, so I want to show you the ending of Ravel's Daphnis and Chloé, where he basically produced an orgiastic dance that has never been heard or seen before. Yeah? In the wrong ballet, so to speak, yeah, because it's a Greek ballet, although it is about love, but the style of it is Oriental, and this is completely in the style of Cleopatra and in the style of Scheherazade. You will hear in it both this choir suddenly joining the orchestra, and you also hear the actual tunes from Scheherazade, which Ravel just stole. He couldn't resist it. Yeah, if you remember in Scheherazade, it's dum ta dum ta dum ta dum. Yeah, that's kind of melody. You will hear it in Ravel. And this is not Fokine choreography, but I think it's very, very good and certainly influenced by the same principles. Very similar tune there. I think really, although this is not exactly authentic what I'm showing to you, but it encapsulates very much the excitement of what happened at the time. I just love this clip. Also because I think it is based on Fokine's idea of visualizing the sound in music. And you could hear that when they were whirling around, Yeah, there was whirling music in the score. And that was Ravel writing music specifically for the ballet. This is what so excited the audiences, that everything seemed to be going together. Yeah, the colors were shouting and screaming. Yeah, the music was dancing. And everything, suddenly was this great harmony of all the arts, pooling together. So the final ballet that we are going to talk about goes even further in a sense, because it now has a new score composed for it. Yeah, in Scheherazade you had a completely new ballet, but the score was already in existence. So this Diaghilev was making the next step. He actually commissions a new score. And Stravinsky became the composer. You can see him looking rather glum. But that was kind of his fashionable face at the time. You can see Fokine in the middle, and this is Bakst, who is, as you can see, but 20 years older by that stage. And they're producing this thing together out of nothing, out of many sources. The plot of the Firebird is not based on any particular Russian fairy tale. It's a concoction of about 10 different sources. And everyone had a go at putting this plot together, so that it was very difficult even to decide who should hold the copyright to the scenario. So Benoit, was part of it, and Fokine actually was one of the main driving forces there, and of course Diaghilev himself also. So what Diaghilev wanted, he wanted a Russian ballet, Russian nationalist ballet, in the same way that you already had the Russian nationalist opera, about maybe 25 of them already. Yeah, there was no Russian national ballet, or what there wasn't good enough. Stravinsky wasn't his first choice. Stravinsky was still very young and completely unknown. He was a student of Rimsky-Korsakov. Rimsky-Korsakov had just died. He also had another connection to the opera and the Mariinsky world. He was the son of Fyodor Stravinsky, who was a very important bass singer. So Diaghilev would have known of him. And in one of the evenings of contemporary music a few years previous, he actually heard his music. But Stravinsky wasn't his first choice. He commissioned it first to Anatoly Lyadov, who was a master of fairy tale music, but a very slow worker. Yeah, so he didn't produce anything. Then apparently he commissioned it to Cherepnin. For some reason that didn't work either. And Stravinsky was entrusted with the creation of this score. And basically, I think his brief was just do the same as Rimsky-Korsakov did, only for ballet. Yeah, so you have this thing that you have the real and the supernatural, you have the Russian and the Oriental all blended together in these different styles, and all ends with this glorification of the Russian element. Various elements of the plot were paraphrasing already familiar Russian operas. I've got them written down somewhere. For example, there's a need to defend an enemy, yeah, who is Koshchei the Immortal. Koshchei or Kashchei comes from the word kost, which is bone. He is basically a skeleton, an evil wizard. But he also happens to be an Oriental enemy, yeah, in this context. So you have to defeat the enemy to rescue the bride, which comes from Ruslan and Lyudmila. You have to procure help from a seductive supernatural being, which is the same as in Sadko, and that being is the Firebird. You have to cast a spell to make the enemy dance until he drops, yeah, which again happens in Sadko, and closing with this hymn of glorification, like many Russian operas close. So, very interesting account of Michel Fokine of how they were working on this ballet, and it seems like they really were working together. So Stravinsky played on the piano, and I interpreted the role of the Tsarevich, yeah, so the main protagonist, the Russian prince. The piano substituting for the wall. What he means is he has to climb over the wall to be on stage. Yeah, so he must have been climbing over the piano. Stravinsky watching, accompanying me. Yeah, so he improvised the music with patches of the Tsarevich melodies, playing mysterious tremolos as background to depict the garden of the sinister immortal Koshchei. Later on, I played the role of the Tsarina. Yeah, so a female role as well, and hesitantly took the golden apple. Then I became Koshchei, his evil entourage, and so on. Yeah, so Fokine was basically playing all the roles, and Stravinsky was improvising the music. All this found most colorful interpretation in the sounds that came from the piano flowing freely from the fingers of Stravinsky. And I will show you how the music works. Yeah, the music really works with the dance. It looks like it was created for that particular situation. You really don't appreciate it when you just hear a suite from the Firebird, yeah, performed in concert. It's just beautiful music. But it was written in particular for those scenes of interactions between characters. Like this is another sketch by Bakst. Yeah, that's the moment of Ivan Tsarevich capturing the Firebird. Yeah, so the Firebird is this being who can help him to marry the woman that he fell in love with, the princess whom he needs to rescue first. Yeah, so, and this magic feather he can procure from the Firebird. But first he needs to catch her. So what you will see, yeah, is this moment of how he catches her. And you can hear that she's a bird in the music, the fluttering of the wings. You can see the fluttering of the wings because this is what she's doing with her arms. And then the kind of terrible moment, the horns play this chord, when she's captured. Yeah, she's captured, she tries to free herself, and then submits to him, and they dance a pas de deux. Yeah, with this very Oriental music, again Oriental music that you will recognize now, again with the same oboe, very seductive melody. That's it. Hippopotamus. So you recognize this, yeah, very seductive music that just draws you in, yeah, and you forget about time, and so she is an interesting character because that's the one who he dances the pas de deux with, yeah, not with his bride. So obviously a girl who's good enough to, to use and dance the pas de deux with, but not to marry. But, so the various interpretations of this interesting conundrum. The Then I wanted to show you the moment where you have this orgiastic dance. Now this is the dance that can't stop, but it's a real evil choreography. It has to be ugly. This is another thing that Fokine discovered, you know, that ballet didn't have to be beautiful and graceful all the time. It had to be expressive. And another thing that Fokine actually didn't want to do, he of course wanted to end the ballet as usual with his mass dance, yeah, which would be again very exciting as he had in Cleopatra and Scheherazade. And Stravinsky suggested ending it rather like an opera would end, with this almost choral-like glorification, yeah. Which you will recognize. It's very familiar music, it's become very popular now. But there is nothing for the dancers to do. Yeah, because these are now Russians that have triumphed. And the Russian body is very different from the Oriental body, and they can't do the orgy because they're not supposed to. Yeah, so they do something very, the opposite almost, yeah? So incredibly decent. Couldn't cut it off, yeah? So the great hymnic celebration, but nothing is happening in terms of ballet, yeah? So I find that very interesting. So, yeah, what I told you, yeah, the Oriental body is not the Russian body. Again, you can tell this from Bakst's design, yeah? It's a very different pose. So, in fact, in the Firebird, we have two types of exoticism. Yeah, for Parisians. For Parisians, the Russian exoticism was also exoticism. And there is an Oriental exoticism, which is exotic to the Russians and to the French. Yeah? So a kind of dual exoticism. Did the French, could they distinguish one from another? I don't think so. I don't think it mattered to them. But for the Russians, it is also important that the Orientalism and the Oriental style became part of defining the self. It was a very important thing for them to develop this colorful style in opposition to Western Europe. And there was even a narrative to go with it, that Russia was this young culture which was going to destroy the old Europe. We don't need your civilization. We were going to wipe it all off. Yeah, the very nice poetic line comes to mind from Alexander Blok. Yes, we are Scythians. Yeah, Scythians was standing for that barbaric nation. Yes, we are Scythians. Yes, Asians we are, with squint and lusty eyes. So the Oriental becomes part of the Russian self-definition, not just the exotic other. But Diaghilev used both to produce something that was Russia for export. And this is a quote from Stravinsky that I wanted to end with, because when he arrived in Paris, he was slightly taken aback by the fact that the words for Russian export seemed to have been stamped everywhere, both on the stage and on the music. Yeah, so what has been produced was kind of commercial product, extremely popular, almost something that you can sell in a department store. And yet at the same time, this was a perfect artistic collaboration which rejuvenated ballet as a genre and prompted other leading artists of the time to involve themselves in Diaghilev's projects, resulting in these productions that combined cutting-edge artistry with popular success. That was an amazing thing, this combination. There was no financial success, though. Yeah, they ended up in debt. Even after the second season, Diaghilev was owing something like $500,000 in today's money. And nevertheless, the demand for the ballet dances, the demand for this product was so great that from 1911, he founded his own ballet company, which was now completely severed from the Russian imperial theaters. And that was the result of what happened during these 2 years. Thank you very much.